So let's start it off with, would you mind sharing how you came to your faith in Christ?
Sure. And how long you got?
As long as you need.
This might take the whole hour. It's a long story, but it wasn't a mountaintop moment. You know, you hear these stories about people, how they had this mountaintop moment and all of a sudden they're, all in. And God had to work on me a long, long time. And he had to use a lot of people in the process to bring me along. But I grew up from, I was raised by two parents that came from very meager lives, as children. And all they wanted to do was really provide something better than they had for their children. And so my dad became an orthodontist. We lived a nice upper middle class life. And they were incredible, loving parents and supportive parents. But my dad particularly, really wanted me to do great things and pushed me hard. And so I was raised in a culture of more, better, achievement, success, all those things. And, as a young person or a young adult, those teachings and how you observe the world is very different than when you get older. I didn't have the foundation. We didn't go to church. And so it was all worldly. And that's how it was ingrained in me. And then as part of that, as I became successful in various ways, I had this, and it was all a story in my head, but I had this perception that I had to do well with the table that was set for me because everybody was watching. And everybody was looking at me as, okay, so he was given this or he was provided that. What's he going to do with that? Because that's how I was kind of raised. And so even if it's something that I created for myself, so I paid my way through my MBA program. My parents paid for my college, which I really appreciate. But I paid for my MBA. And I came out, I graduated from the University of Michigan. It's a top 5 program at the time, with a great reputation. And I felt from day one this pressure of, so what are you going to accomplish with that? And so it had to be, more, and that was measured by title, by accumulation of wealth, by the things that you owned, all those things. And that was the measure. And that was always the measure that I was taught. And so that pushed me further and further and further away from any relationship with God, because those things just don't work together very well. And so God put my wife in my life in college, and she's the number one reason why, that journey began. Though I was stubborn and I was going to go the way I wanted to go, and I needed to provide for her, and I needed to provide for my family, and I needed to do all these things to show that I've provided for my family, right? All these worldly measures of what I've done to provide for my family. And no matter what she tried to do to kind of bring me down the path towards Jesus Christ, I was not going there. It was not a priority for me. As we talked about earlier, I was a good person. I was, that's what God wanted, right? I was a good person. So, I didn't realize how short-sighted that was. So I just kind of kept doing the thing. And I justified it with, hey, I'm working hard for my family. And she was patient, and she kept working on me. She kept working on me. Then it became, okay, we'll go to church. Then when my oldest daughter, Carly, was born, I felt this tug of, I should be doing something for her. I should be doing, I should be going to church. I should be a good role model. And I don't know where the tug came from, but it was a feeling of like guilt if I did not do that. So we started going to church. I wouldn't say we were, C&E churchgoers, just Christmas and Easter, but we didn't go, every week. We weren't super consistent, but I was going. And so that was another step in that direction. And my wife kept working on me. And then we got more involved with the church. And then it sounds a little hypocritical, and I think it is. I was asked, because of my involvement in the church, to be an elder in the church. And I was a believer, but I was a convenient Christian. If it was convenient for me, then, I'll do whatever, you want me to do. Whatever you want me to do, not necessarily whatever God wants me to do, whatever I want to do. And, but so I got more involved with the church. And then, that brought me closer. I mean, that was another step. I mean, those things, all those things were little steps, but finally, she got herself, I think she finally got to a point where she wasn't going to wait for me anymore. She was going to begin really more living her faith out. I think she was holding back a little bit around me. And that was an interesting time, because she got involved in this Bible study, and she was spending dedicated time every morning, like an hour every morning, reading the Bible, doing the study, praying, and I could see her growing in her life. I could see she was, very busy in life with the kids and with the job she was working. And she said that when she started doing that, she felt that she was more focused, more productive. Didn't feel as busy. Feel like she was starting in the right place every day, and God was pointing her in the right direction every day. And I could see her growing. And, I was watching that, but not sure what to do with it. And then finally, I think she just got to a point where she sat me down one night, and she said, and she talked to me for 30 minutes, and I didn't say a word, and that never happens. And she said, you're just checking the boxes. You're just going through the motions. Well, what do you mean? I go the extra 9 yards. I leave it all out there, right? I mean, I work my butt off. Look at the hours I'm working. Look what I'm doing. Everything I do, I put it all in. She's like, well, not with this, you don't. And she talked to me for 30 minutes, just went on and on and on. I didn't even remember what she said. But I walked away from that with a strange feeling of, she's sprinting past me. And it was scary to be left behind, if that makes sense. Even though that was around faith, and that's not something I was really focused on. I just had that strong feeling. So I said to her, she says, you need to join a Bible study. So I said, okay. And I did. And I wanted to be cognizant of all the things she had just spoken to me. And so I joined this Bible study. And it was like a formal group. It's a national organization. And I went, and it was the same one she went to. She went to an all-women's one, so I went to it was the same, actually it was a different evening, but I went to an all-men's one. And I went the first time, and there was a bunch of guys sitting around a table, monotone, reading their answers to the questions. And there was nothing there for me. Again, I was making it about me, of course, not about God.
Right.
But I came back and I said, I'm not going back. And she said, how about if we go to the couples one? And I'm like, that means you're going to be going to two. And you're going to be reading two different books. And you're going to be, she said, that's okay. She's just discipling me all the way through. And so I said, okay. And we went to the couples one. And I was about 3 weeks behind when they started. And they were reading Joshua, the book of Joshua. And at the time, I was working at Washburn University. I was leading their Leadership Institute. Leadership was what I had gotten my doctorate in, and that was where my passion was. And in hindsight, I'd looked back later. God put me in the Bible study with the book of Joshua, which has leadership all over it. Just everywhere in that book. And I've thought, God met me where I was. at the time that he needed to, that was the moment where God could reach me in that way. And so I loved it. I loved the book. I loved the study. The group was great. And that just kind of took off from there. And that was kind of my starting point. I had a long journey from there of growth. But that's really where the story started. And then I just kind of kept investing in what I was doing, and my faith grew and grew and grew over time.
Where are you in birth order? Are you the oldest?
3 children. I'm the middle, surrounded by 2 sisters.
Oh my goodness!
So I think they call it the prince.
So you're the only male. So that probably also attributed to you feeling like you had to really perform.
Interestingly, there was so much drama that I was surrounded by. That just think of teenage girls, right?
Yep.
Right. There was so much drama that I was the peacekeeper. I was the kind of just smoothing everything over. Just making,
but you talked about
work.
Feeling like you had to really overachieve, right? After you got your MBA and with parents like that. I wonder if you being the only male also had some part in that.
I think that's possible. I mean, my dad was the driver of like me being successful and being the only son. I could see, I don't know for a fact, but I could see that maybe he drove me a little harder.
Did you ever think that you recreated your own family to mimic yours? Because you have 2 girls and a guy, a boy, and the boy's in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so funny.
And when we were first married and we started talking about children, Brenda, I wanted 2, probably because of that. She wanted 4.
Well, then you met in the middle.
So that's where we started. So we had the first 2, and both of us, after the second was born, Griffin was born. She wanted 4. She was ready to go, another round. I was 2. It surprised me. I was like, yeah, I kind of want a 3rd one. And then we had Peyton, and that was just a horrific delivery. Where Brenda was at risk in that delivery, and so we both were done after that. This is it. And sure enough, I did exactly to my son what I said I would never do, is recreate what I grew up with. So yeah.
So you said that. First off, I think it's funny. It's actually really funny to me and really just amazing. That's the best answer to this is, where would we be without our women, without our wives? I've interviewed multiple men, and a lot of them, it all started with their wives.
Their faith journey?
Yes. It's crazy how just the commonality in that. And it also applies to me too. If it wasn't for my wife, I would be so lost and I would be so on the wrong path. But it's interesting because the Bible clearly shows that men are leaders. They should be leaders, but we're nothing. And we're basically only halfway there without women, right? That's why Eve was created from our rib. Was we needed somebody to keep us on the straight and narrow.
Absolutely.
Because we never grow up. We never grow up. And the female, the woman, they grow up very early. I mean, you can compare with your kids, just how quickly they mature compared to boys. And
well, I can give you a different example. When I was the director of the Leadership Institute at Washburn, when I got there were 35 or so students in that program. And there were maybe 3 guys.
Wow.
And it was all young ladies. And I thought that was really strange at first when I started. Well, the longer I was there and as the program grew, I started to see a different attitude and approach towards studying and investing in leadership by students. The young women were passionate about it. the young men were too cool for it.
Mm.
And I think that goes to men in general.
Yep.
We're stubborn.
Yep.
We know how to do it.
Yep.
And you don't need to tell me. That's soft.
Mm-hmm.
And the women figured it out way before the men.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that evolve because I focused on that, and really invested in some young men in that regard. And I think it started to evolve. But in general, I think that's the default. I think, like you said, I think they mature quicker.
Yep.
I also think they have a steeper hill to climb in our society.
Yeah.
If they want to have a career and they want to be successful, whatever that means to them, they have a steeper hill than men do. And so I think that's part of it too.
I built my business with mostly females, and they're just easier to work with, to be honest.
I currently work with all women.
Well, it doesn't count if one of them's your wife.
It works well on most days.
Yeah. But then you have to go home with her.
there's that one, yeah.
So going back to what you said earlier with Peyton, with your daughter, what really stood out for me was when you said that you wanted to be a good role model for Peyton by going to church. But then I was thinking, well, why would that make you a good role model if you weren't truly in the faith yet? Isn't that interesting?
It's a great observation. It was actually Carly and not Peyton.
Oh.
Carly was our first and Peyton was our third.
Got it. Yeah.
But that's an interesting observation. I think it's because, I think there was some tug that religion,
Yes.
right, whatever that means to you, needed to be in our family's life.
And I think that's common with most people in our society, especially if you're in the upper class areas. You have to somehow check the box of attending church.
Yes.
Because now you are normal.
Yes.
And now you are culturally accepted.
Yeah.
But just checking the box doesn't necessarily mean there's actual faith there.
No, but I didn't know that at the time. I think it's more of a point in time thing, so I think that's a great observation, but I don't think I knew the difference. I thought I was checking the box, like you say, with religion.
Sure.
And so I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I had no idea what being a faithful believer really meant, and what it required of me. If it required anything of me, I probably wouldn't have been doing it at the time. I had other things to do. I was busy, man. A lot going on.
I get it. You're talking to the ADHD entrepreneur over here.
Yeah.
And it seems that it seems like a giant hurdle in front of us, and that hurdle is the Bible. But for some reason, we don't want to even attempt to jump over that hurdle. But when we get closer to that hurdle, we realize it's just a speed bump. It's really not that tall and big, and it actually becomes something that is a vehicle for us and not an obstacle. Because it seemed like your faith really deepened once you started getting into Bible study and actually reading the Bible.
Yes, absolutely. I can only speak for myself, but I think it's probably pretty common. I looked at the Bible and it was a hard read.
Yes.
When I hadn't read it before.
Yep.
If you just pick up the Bible sometimes, if it's not something you're fully committed to, like, hey, this is where I am and this is what I want to do, you pick it up. It's a hard read. And especially if you pick up the King James version.
Right.
Right. But even any version, especially in the Old Testament, you hear people say, I can read the New Testament, but man, the Old Testament, man, that's just too hard. I can't,
It's like a history book.
Yeah. And I love the Old Testament.
Yes.
I love both, but I actually lean more towards wanting to read the Old Testament more than the New Testament. Interestingly, but I think it's, again, like I said, God met me where I was at that time, and He put the book of Joshua in front of me. And I think that's sometimes what it takes is something that is relevant to you, meaningful to you. I could pick that up and I could read it with a little bit of guidance in this Bible study and totally get it and understand it. And you're right. Once that fire is lit, I could read Samuel, Ruth.
Yes.
The books that came after Joshua is what I read next.
Yes.
On to Kings, and it was I couldn't get enough of it. But a year before that, I would probably picked up any of those books and been like, this is boring. It's a hard read.
It's such an interesting story. And I think, in my opinion, this whole idea of what does it mean when you say you're a Christian? Well, what does that mean? That you go to church, here and there, or you wear a cross on your neck, whatever it may be. But that just seems so surface level. And I think there's such confusion on that definition. It really comes down to the Bible, the doctrine. This is the manual. Do you want to become, or do you want to be a Christian? Here it is.
Yep.
But finding the discipline to actually read the Bible, and even starting with, I would say, start with the easiest translation that is available. We all have smartphones. You can download for free any translation you want. So there's not any reason that we can't take that next step. But for some reason, that hurdle always looks way too high for us to even attempt to jump over.
I don't even know what to add to that. I mean, I think you hit it on the head.
And even YouTube.
Yeah.
You can watch documentaries on the Old Testament. You can listen to, again, on your iPhone or on your phone, download the Bible app. You can just listen to it while you're driving. So I don't know. The reason why I'm just bringing this up, because even for me, again, very much busy, always thinking about productivity books and how I can make the business grow, but never taking that time to actually dive into the Bible. And just knowing that there's really no excuse for me. I can do it. I just have to make it a priority. Yeah. So tell me about Scraps KC.
Yeah, Scraps KC is a nonprofit that my wife Brenda and I co-founded and operate and run together now. It is going on its 7th year in existence. We incorporated in April of 2016 and opened our doors in September of 2016. But it came from a lot of things coming together is what inspired it. Most of which things that were going on or had gone on in Brenda's life, and I was really being supportive. It became more part of me and who I am as it evolved. I just enjoyed the entrepreneurial part of it at the beginning. I enjoyed the startup nature of it and growing a business, which is what my career was about. But it really started because Brenda always in her life, always going back to childhood, she grew up with World War I era parents, and they were that's when her parents grew up, and so they were always conserving and reusing, and they went through the Great Depression, so they were always very careful about the resources and how could they use things in different ways, and so she kind of grew up with that, and then. As her story goes, when she tells it, other experiences after in college and beyond, that were similar. And there was a place in Kansas City for a while that was similar to Scraps KC as a creative reuse center, but it closed its doors. And she thought, maybe I should open one. And she was at a kind of a transition point in her life and career. And at the same time, we were serving the homeless in Kansas City. And we've been doing that for a few years. And we had some homeless men coming to us and saying, hey, can you give me a job? Well, we weren't in a place where we could give them a job. I was working for a large employer, and Brenda didn't have a job to give. And so we kind of put the two ideas together. And so we opened this creative reuse center, but we did it for the homeless. And so what it is, and the mission is real simple. It's transform the unwanted into something of value. And so it has 3 parts to its mission. The first part is environmental. And so we divert materials from the landfill. And you can think about it like Habitat Restore, but for creative materials. And so the constituencies that are interested in it are artists, teachers, makers, do-it-yourselfers, parents, people that are seamstresses, or people that are like to quilt, or just all those kinds of people. And we have businesses and manufacturers who are providing us products or even offcuts from their manufacturing process that they would otherwise throw out, and they're diverting it to us. We have individuals who are just cleaning out their basements, or their mother-in-law passed away and they're emptying out their house, that kind of stuff, and they bring it to us, according to the list of things we take, of course.
So it's like a secondhand Hobby Lobby.
It kind of is. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I always search for kind of like that short way to describe it. And I always say Habitat Restore for creative materials. I kind of like
Well, everything you said, it's just reminds me of Hobby Lobby, all the quilting and arts and crafts stuff.
It is. And so, in almost 7 years, we've diverted over 350 tons of material from the landfill. I mean, we get between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds a week that we process. That comes through our doors. So when we started, we were in 4,000 square feet down the West Bottoms.
So when you started, how did you guys raise the capital for this?
We personally did it. And so we actually did it by guaranteeing a line of credit. So we didn't put the cash out, but we guaranteed the line of credit personally to start it.
So you basically did.
We basically did. We put the risk out there with us. Yeah, exactly. And so that's how it got started. We had over time. I mean, we were by month 5 in the black.
Good for you guys.
But it wasn't always a lot into the black, right? So it was still pretty stressful.
Black is black.
Well,
even if it's breaking even, especially for a startup.
Yeah, and I think 3 times. So I think we started with a $25,000 line of credit, and I think we brought that down to 0 and back up to 25 3 times. And then after the 3rd time bringing it back to 0, we never used it again. After that. But that's how we started, and we grew so fast. After 2 years, we moved into a 14,000 square foot facility in Midtown, and a better location. It was about half full when we started. And we're like, oh, we could live here forever. This is great. And about a year and a half later, it was full. And it just keeps growing. It just keeps growing every year. So anyway, we have the environmental mission, but the second part of the mission is serving the homeless. And so we've employed a couple. We have one formerly homeless person employed right now. They come in, though, and they'll volunteer. It gives them some community, a place they go and have dignity, where people call them by their first name and treat them the same as anyone else. Of customers come in, we'll have volunteers come in who treat them like anybody else. And so it's community for them, but it's also a place where they feel they can contribute. And so they'll come in and they'll help us run the operation. And in return, we have a kitchen. We'll feed them lunch. We'll send them home at night with food. We have a room in the back with donations of clothes and hygiene products and survival items that they need, and we'll give them what they need to survive. And so that's the other benefit for them as well. And then we go out and serve on the street every week, and that's how we introduce homeless that don't know who we are to Scraps KC. And so most of the homeless that will walk in the doors at Scraps KC are individuals that we've met out on the street first, and built a little trust, and then they'll walk in the door. And then we can help them on the street a little bit. I mean, we can feed them, we can give them some clothes, things like that. But where we can really help them is when they walk in the door. So.
And what was the third one?
Education. And that's really focused on probably 2 parts of it. One is educating about the first 2 parts. So educating about the environment, refuse, reuse, reduce, upcycling, those kinds of things. But also educating about homelessness as well. And we'll do educational programs, workshops, things like that. But the second part of the education mission is teachers in Kansas City. We really, Brenda was a former teacher, or is a former teacher. And we really want to support our teachers in Kansas City. You hear these stories and they're true. The average amount of money that a teacher spends out of their pocket each year is $800 to $1,000 because they have no budget. We've had teachers tell us they're an art teacher, and so they have every kid in the school that comes through their room every week. They kind of rotate through. 500 kids. For the entire school year, they have a budget of $500. For art, they have $1 per kid for a whole year for art. And so they love coming to Scraps KC because their money can go a lot further, with what they can get. But we've also initiated a program a few years ago, a school supply distribution program once a year. And we have drives around the city in May when school ends and things get thrown out. And for example, last May, we collected 17,000 pounds of school supplies. And then in late July, we had 400 teachers come through Scraps KC and walk out for free with, at a minimum, 2 big boxes of school supplies to take to their classroom.
Wow.
And it's Brenda's favorite day of the year, being a former teacher, because there'll be teachers crying. There'll be teachers that, they're getting stuff that they can't afford or they can't get through their budgets. So we got a grant this year to evolve that program to a year-round program.
Wow.
So teachers can come in and reload, not just the one time at the beginning of the school year, but they can come in more than once and reload. And hopefully they're not spending any money. But
they shouldn't.
Yeah, they shouldn't, but they do.
Yeah. So then right now don't you guys have a kind of a partnership with Blue Valley and Shawnee Mission as well?
A formal partnership with Blue Valley, yeah, where they've got 17 of their, I think they're all elementary and middle. There might be a high school in there, but 17 of their schools that are actually, they have a Scraps Casey bin in their school, and they collect school supplies throughout the year for us. And so, a couple times during the school year, we'll pick up supplies from the schools. So it's not just the big drive at the end of the year, but we wanted them to role model that partnership so that we can go to other districts and do the same thing. And what's really cool is, and what some of the teachers I think really enjoy about being that partner that we've heard from, is who it's going to help. And so they're actively asking us, how can we show the parents and the kids and the staff at these schools where those supplies are going? Can we do a video? Can we do something like that? Because they go to Kansas City, Missouri schools, KCK schools that don't have the same budgets that Blue Valley does. But it also goes to teachers in those districts too, because they don't have budgets. I mean, they have to spend their own money too.
So if Olathe and Shawnee Mission is listening,
yes,
go or contact Jeff or Brenda, and let's get that partnership started.
Absolutely, or any district. So in Kansas City.
So let's talk about, how did you get up to this point? I know you were a professor at Washburn for leadership, and that really is interesting for me, trying to lead my team in the business setting. So after you got your MBA, did you go to Washburn after that?
No. So I have a very eclectic background. How much time do you want to spend on this?
Well, as much as you want, but maybe give me the bullet points.
So I went to undergraduate at Boston College, degree in economics. I was having a great time in school, and the jobs I was interviewing for just looked really boring to me, and I always had this entrepreneur's heart and spirit. So what did I do with my economics degree is I started a chicken wing delivery business right out of college.
Fun.
In Washington, D.C., because there were a lot of universities there. And 80% of our revenue came between 12 and 3 in the morning. Just go figure.
Yeah.
So I did that. And it was a brutal lifestyle.
Wait, while you're going to school?
No. After I graduated.
Okay.
Right after I graduated, okay. And it was hard. It was it's hard enough to start a business, as you know, both those hours, and it was a cash business, so there were controls that I just had to be careful of, and I mean, and maybe at the time I might have been good. I don't know. In hindsight, I laugh. I'm like, I wasn't very good. I didn't know a lot.
How long did it last?
About 3 years, two and a half years.
And then after you close that business down, then what
yeah. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I figured, had an opportunity through a friend of the family to get a job in corporate auditing at KPMG Pete Marwick.
That's not boring to you? All these jobs are boring. When you say corporate auditing,
well,
wake me up after I'm done with my nap.
I felt like it was time for me to be more responsible.
To grow up a little?
To grow up a little bit, exactly. And not just be this free swinger, that's, gonna work all hours of the night and know all the bartenders.
Did you meet Brenda at that time?
No, I met Brenda in college.
So this whole time when you're doing the wing business.
So she moved to Williamsburg, Virginia to teach. And I was in DC a couple hours away. And so the first year, I didn't have the time. I was working 7 days a week to go down there. So she'd come up on the weekends, and I was ignorant 22, 23-year-old. I didn't appreciate as much as I do now the sacrifice she made. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's working 5 days a week as a teacher. That's a lot of work.
Yes.
And then she's driving up 2 hours north to take orders and cook chicken wings and deliver some of them.
Oh my, wow.
Right. And then driving back down. So
we never realized it at the time.
I know.
We just never do. I'm right there with you.
There's so many things that I wish I was a little bit more observant of, then. Mm-hmm. So, but after a year, she ended up getting a teaching job up in the Virginia, DC area. And so we were closer at that point.
So did you take the auditing job?
I did. And the reason I did was because I figured, hey, I don't really know what I want to do now. This will give me exposure to a lot of different industries. Mm-hmm. I knew it wasn't going to be that exciting, but I felt like it's time to grow up a little and it was time to learn.
That's interesting. So you went from looking for a exciting, fun job that you can be passionate about to then getting a little bit more realistic and logical and thinking, you know what, I need to put my hours in. I need to put my time in so then I maybe can do that job that I've always dreamed about. And you're going to have to sacrifice in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know if I was that smart, but
but it seems like it worked out like that.
But I think that was kind of bouncing around in my head a little bit. All those things you just said, and it lasted 2 years because I have an entrepreneur spirit.
Wow. And so what was after that?
And I just couldn't do it anymore. It was it was exactly for me what it sounded like. It just was not that exciting. And so, but I learned a ton.
I bet
I learned a ton, and so. My exit strategy from that was going back to school. So that's when I went to the University of Michigan and got my MBA. And I loved it. I got involved in a lot of entrepreneurial stuff. Got connected with some professors in the program that were in those fields and got projects that were sponsored by startup companies and, just got gave me that taste back of all that excitement, that I experienced before.
So that's a 2-year program?
It was a 2-year program.
So after that, then what was next?
So I that's how I ended up down here in Kansas City. I ended up being recruited by Sprint. And they had a program called a Staff Associate Program, which was an executive development program. And it was a rotational type program for 3 years. They put you through like 3 rotations in different parts of the company, different kinds of jobs. Helps you kind of explore and learn and discover, where you can contribute the greatest value to the company, but also what you enjoy the most as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so, I went through those rotations. So it was perfect because, my ability to focus on the same job for longer than a year was probably not there, and so it was perfect for me because I could explore and learn and do it in a structured environment. But I ended up in those jobs in all of the startup businesses that Sprint was doing because that's just where I attracted to, and so I got 6 months into it. They moved me into another unit, which was the unit that was building the first internet network, right? We were competing with the big dogs at the time, AT&T and MCI and building out these internet networks because it was 1995. And so it was the Wild West, at the beginning of the internet. And I was right in the middle of it. It was perfect, right? I had the structure and the security and the benefits of a big company, but I was an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur. And we were left to do our thing, just to build this thing, and we had to do it. We had to build it fast. There was this pressure to build it fast, and so it was day and night.
This was the mobile network that was getting built?
No, before mobile. This was the internet.
Wow.
I mean, this was before wireless.
Sprint had something to do with this? For them, at least?
Yeah. And so, I mean, these were the days where, the premier internet provider was AOL.
I remember.
Right? And they would
still have nightmares of that little sound that would always play when you're trying to dial in.
Oh yeah, the modem, the sound of the modem, the 2.4. You look back to the speed of those things; it's just hilarious.
Yeah.
But in AOL was the one they were putting their CD or the discs. They were actually floppies, I think, at the time, into cereal boxes, and they were distributing it everywhere because the way you connected to the internet was you got one of these discs, and then you put the disc in your computer and downloaded it.
Yep.
And that's how you would get connected to the internet.
Right. I remember.
You couldn't just do it, and so I got promoted real quick to a director position, which was probably generous. And I was like, scrambling like heck to prove myself, but also I was running, I think we called it sales and distribution. So I was building the sales call centers that people would call, and then the fulfillment center where we would produce those discs. And so those had to connect. So they call the call center then sends the order to the distribution center, and then they mail out the discs.
So when they promoted you, maybe you were thinking, I don't know if I'm the man for this job. And then after you were in the job, then it kind of forced you to rise
totally
to the expectation of the job.
That's exactly what it was. And I didn't tell anybody I wasn't the man for the job, right? But the general manager of that unit became just an incredible mentor. He saw something in me, and he invested in me, and he knew he was taking a risk. But he became an incredible mentor of mine, and to this day, he's a very close friend and still a mentor of mine. He took a chance on me, and he propelled my career, in a very significant way. And so,
How old were you at the time?
I was 30. 30 years old. I was a very young director in the company. Plus, I was fighting a perception too of like being spoiled because I came through that staff associate program.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I got things that other people didn't get, which just fed into that whole problem I had from growing up. Of, I've got this table set for me, and now I got to prove myself.
So how long were you at Sprint?
I was at Sprint about 9 years, a little over 9 years.
And then why did you leave?
Well, there's a longer story to that too, but I had an opportunity as part of the staff associate program at the very end to become an executive assistant to the COO. Executive assistant. It was a way for them to continue to develop future executives by giving them exposure to the highest levels of what's going on in the company. And so basically you end up working on some projects for that executive and whatever they want you to do.
Sure.
And he was amazing because he really developed me as well. After about 3 weeks, maybe 50% of my time was working on projects, and then the rest of it was open time. And so I went back to him and I just said, "You got anything else that you'd like me to be doing? Because I've got all this extra time." And he said, "No." He said, "I want you to watch and I want you to learn." He said, "My calendar is open to you. You can come to any one of my meetings other than a personnel, meeting. And I just want you to watch and learn." And so he gave me about 50% of my time with some pretty big projects, and the other 50% roughly just growing and maturing and watching how things were done.
Did you actually did you join him? And
I took advantage of that.
I would have too.
100%. I went to every meeting.
How long did you do that for?
15 months.
Wow.
Well, and coincidentally, it was at the time when MCI and Sprint went through the whole merger that ended up not being approved and falling through.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to observe from the front row seats the first phone call all the way to the press conference, announcing it, the merger. I got to see every step of the way. I got to sit in on all the due diligence in New York City where the two companies met and went through every part of the business and learned about each other's business to see if this would work, see if this was a fit.
You were part of those conversations.
Yeah, I got to. I was more observing. I wasn't say I was part of those conversations.
Sorry, yeah, you were
but
basically fly on the wall.
As a fly on the wall, and I was running errands for the COO, helping him with whatever he needed that week. But we had the business unit presidents coming in. Today we're going to do the consumer unit. Tomorrow we're going to do the B2B unit. And I was sitting in there with Bernie Ebbers, our top C-level folks. The CFO of MCO was Scott Sullivan, and he was the smartest guy I've ever seen in my life to this day.
Why is that?
I was mesmerized by how smart the guy was, how he could look at two massive businesses and just break it down so easily and so quickly to all the piece parts and how it all worked together. And he was too smart for his own good because he ended up in prison. And along with Bernie Ebbers. I don't know if you know that story.
No, I did not know that.
For anyone listening to this, they can Google that and find tons of it. But anyway, I got to experience once in a lifetime.
What was your main takeaway? What was your main thing that you took from that 15-month experience of sitting in those meetings that you went on and use today?
Something, and I still talk about it today, but something I never realized until maybe a couple years after the fact. Is the importance and the value and the power of asking good questions. So the COO I worked for, he was unbelievable at that. I didn't even recognize he was doing that until after the fact. I was just absorbing it. But he would have like a business unit president come in and present a business case for, new business or new part of their business, something that they wanted some money for, that they were going to be asking him for some money for. And it'd be an hour-long meeting, and they would present it, and he just asked questions the entire time. And in hindsight, I looked back, and he knew exactly where that needed to end up. He knew enough about it to ask the right questions, and he led them to the answer by the questions he asked. And we got to the end of the meeting, and they said, okay, so if I understand correctly, what I need to do next is X, Y, and Z, and then come back to you. And he said, exactly, that's perfect. And they walked out, and he never told them anything. There's no telling. It was all asking. And he led them to what they needed to understand to take the next step. And he did that in every meeting. And it was amazing how good he was at that. And I didn't realize it until a couple jobs later, when someone said to me, you ask really good questions. Wow, you really listen, and really you just ask questions. And it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, I absorbed that from him. I didn't even know that I was absorbing that like that. And to this day, I have people just tell me that, that where I'm effective is because I ask really good questions. And so that was the number one thing that just had such an impact, probably in ways I'm not even appreciating, in my career.
I love that. I mean, that's just the secret to human relationships. You can apply that, and this is something I constantly have to work with on myself, of not just telling. I'm impatient, so I just sometimes will just tell. You can ask my wife; she'll attest to that. And even specifically with your children, as parents, we naturally just want to say, go do that, or go clean that. But instead, the best way, from my experience of teaching kids for over 20 years or longer, is asking them that perfect question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I noticed the table was dirty after you left it. Who do you think is supposed to clean that up?
Right.
So then now they have to think about what you're talking about, as opposed to the difference is when you say, go clean that table, all they have to think about is yes or no. Am I going to do it or not? And that's not enough brain activity for them to have buy-in to actually performing the task.
Well, and they'll usually default to not because it's their parent telling them to do something, right?
Exactly. So they're already automatically in the defensive mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then after Sprint, then what was next?
When I left Sprint is when I decided to go back and get my doctorate.
Wow.
And there's a whole long story behind that, which I won't get into, but the COO that I worked for and the CEO, who I got to know pretty well at the same time, they were ousted from their positions in, I think it was 2002. And it was very controversial. And it was during that whole period when Enron was imploding, WorldCom was imploding, all the accounting practices, that kind of stuff. These were two men of the highest integrity that I'd ever worked with. And the things that they were removed for put that in question. And to this day, I didn't see anything that would put it in question for me. And I really struggled with that. And I thought it was board members, CYA. Mm-hmm. They were afraid because of everything that was going on around in the industry. And because of some things that they saw that they were afraid might happen to us. And so they were preemptively making a move that I thought was premature and for the wrong reasons. And so I heard about it one day, like everybody else. And the immediate thing I did is I went into the mode of taking care of the business unit I was leading. You know, we got to keep our productivity up. We can't let this knock us off our track. And I didn't process it personally because I was so focused on that. And then I went into, after a short period of time, this funk. It was just this. It was a depression, and I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't get out of it. It lasted weeks, and the associate pastor at our church knew what I was doing and what was going on, and he just asked me how I was doing. He said, "How you doing with all that?" And I told him, I explained to him, I just can't figure it out. I can't get out of this fog, you know. And he said, "Can I offer some thoughts?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "You're grieving." And I said, "What am I grieving?" I said, "These two executives that I know so well, they'll land on their feet. You know, they'll be fine. Financially, they're fine in their lives. What am I grieving?" And he said, "You're grieving an ideal." And that was just like the weight just came off my shoulders because he's exactly right. It was like, he said, you had a perspective of corporate America, of your company, of the role you played in that. And it was a very idealistic perspective. And you're realizing for the first time it doesn't work like that. And he hit it right on the head. And it put me into it was great. It took that weight off my shoulder. But then the next question was, what am I going to do with that?
And maybe, why am I still there?
And well, that's what immediately was through my head. Do I want to be there anymore?
Right.
And it put me into a couple year period of introspection of what do I want to do with my life? And so I just went through. I took my time, and I realized, you know, I didn't love the company anymore. I loved it when it started, but it changed so much. Technology I didn't love. The product I didn't love. What I loved was the people. What I loved was developing people, seeing their families flourish, seeing their careers flourish, seeing them grow, developing them as leaders. And that's why I decided I needed to leave and I needed to pursue that. That's where my passion is. And so I went back on my doctorate in leadership, focused. It was in management, but focused in leadership. And then ended up at Washburn after that, running their leadership institute.
How long were you at Washburn?
5 years. In Topeka. We had already moved back to Kansas City. And I wasn't going to move to Topeka at that point. We'd moved the family enough. So I drove, commuted every day. And you got to love your job to do it 5 years. And I loved my job, loved working with the students. But I just, after 5 years, I couldn't do it anymore.
So with leadership, and specifically in the professional environment, if there are leaders listening to this, what do you think is the one absolute must-have if you want to be successful in coaching, guiding, and leading others?
Serving. You've heard the term servant leadership.
Right, it's become so
it's
buzzword.
Exactly, but it really comes down to serving. And serving those that you are leading and not serving yourself. So many leaders are so self-serving. I've seen leaders that hold back in some of their development because they see it as a threat.
Yes.
Right? Like, well, they get to know too much. They don't see it as, hey, all boats rise with the tide. Or if they develop them too much, right now they're contributing great. If I develop them too much, then someone else is going to hire them away. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a compliment. Develop the next person, right? Don't have that fear. You want to do the best by that person in their life and in their career. And so, servant leadership, is the coined term.
Yeah.
I just call it serving others, getting outside of yourself, focusing on how you, even holistically, can develop people to achieve all that they want to achieve in their life.
Isn't that the truth? This idea that you have this bucket of knowledge. And honestly, I was kind of raised like this, but it's this bucket of knowledge that if you dump it all out and make it available to the other person to absorb and to fill their bucket, now, why do they need you? But on the other side of this, maybe this holds the leader accountable. What are you doing to fill your bucket? So there's always new content in there. So then the other person who's learning from you always has more content, which really goes back to you should always be learning anyways.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes into life too. I'm going to use your analogy with knowledge, but it goes to life too. It's that concept of filling your cup, right? So you've heard of that, right?
Of course.
So, people say, you need to fill your cup, right? So you can pour into others.
Sure.
Right. And so, and what I always notice, like with my wife, she just poured. She poured and poured and poured and poured until there was nothing in there. And she would be worn out from just pouring into other people. And she'd need to fill her cup. And then she'd finally realize that. Like, she's so selfless, she's not thinking it at the time, I need to fill my cup. She's just pouring. So she would fill her cup and then start pouring again, right? Well, I, in my career, would look at it differently. I looked at it as a scarcity mindset, right? So if I pour, it's going to put me at risk, right? It's going to there's going to be less and less there for me. And so I'd fill, and I'd fill, and I'd fill, and I'd store. I wouldn't pour, I'd store, right? And I'd fill, and I'd fill, and I'd fill. And that's not serving others. That's just serving yourself. And that's one of the big realizations. And my faith journey contributed to that realization as well. And serving the homeless significantly contributed to that. There's always more. And if you have faith, the more you pour, the more God's going to fill you.
Oh my goodness. Amen to that.
Right.
In any way, not just knowledge,
exactly.
Financially.
Exactly.
And really, I mean, when we talk about servant leadership, my question then is, if you don't want to give all of yourself, knowledge, time that you have, what is the other option?
I don't know. I look at it now and I don't know.
What is the other option? Do you give them half, but then are they going to do the best job that they can with all the knowledge that is available? Probably not. So you're not going to get your return on investment in that person, just even in a financial way, when you don't. Just for me, it's that radical transparency. So even in our business, our books are pretty much open to anybody who wants to see them. We have a profit sharing program. We are very much vocal every single month on how much we are getting in the business financially. But I think there's kind of a hesitancy with businesses. I was there, is if you let the employees know how much you're making, they're going to want more money.
Right.
But I have not found that to be the case.
Interesting.
Not at all.
Wow.
And I think it's that vulnerability and the trust, because I think trust is everything in all relationships. And that includes from employer to employee, is when you show your employees that you really trust them with these confidential numbers. I think they think, well, wow, I must be special if he really trusts me, or he has nothing to hide. So there's no reason I need to think about anything else other than doing my best in my role.
That's rare. I mean, that's rare. I got to believe. I can't look into private businesses, obviously, but just knowing private business owners and just society and how it operates, that's exceptionally rare. I mean, great, good for you. That's awesome. I mean, I give you a lot of credit for doing that, because there's a lot of courage in doing that.
It wasn't easy.
I'm sure.
It was a journey.
Sure.
I mean, it was a little at a time. And then there was one, I've read a book, I can't remember what it's called, Great Game of Business. Sorry. It was written by the business owner in Springfield. He has kind of an industrial business, but they do the profit sharing program, and they have completely open books. And that really shifted my mind on just let it go. Just show and share and get everybody on the same page. And honestly, it's done wonders, just even financially on the bottom line.
Well, they all want to win together then.
Right. That is 100%.
I mean, it goes to another learning that I had over the years, which is, are you being transactional or transformational? Right. And you look at relationships. Are you being transactional or relational? And I was being transactional. Everything was a transaction. It was like, I'm going to do this for you, and you're going to give this to me. I'm going to work 18 hours a day for the next 6 months, and you're going to promote me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have an employee do something for me because it's got to get done, and I'm going to pay them. Right? It's all transactional, and you got to get out of that mindset. You got to get to a transformational mindset. Right? It's like the concept of adding versus multiplying. So adding is spending. Multiplying is investing. Right? So when you're in a transactional mindset, you're just spending. You're not really investing. And you can think about that in terms of how you manage people. So you can delegate to somebody and ask them just to do a task for you, and that's very transactional. Or you can mentor them and invest in them, right? That's transformational. That's multiplying versus adding.
I love that. So I'm definitely going to be thinking on that one. That is extremely profound.
Even just personally, I think of you. So, I mean, you can go and you can go binge the latest hot show on Netflix. That's spending, right? That's adding. Or you can go watch a documentary on something that's going to move you forward in your knowledge about something so you can help somebody else. I know you do a lot of that kind of stuff.
I actually feel guilty by watching things that aren't educational.
Well, there you go. But that's investing. Right. That's a different mindset.
So as we wrap this up, what would be the most impactful book that you've read during your professional career or even now, other than the Bible?
I don't have a book. I've been asked this question before, and I can't come up with a good answer for a specific book. I think because it's point in time. So there's different points in time where like certain books were like great at that time for me. And at other points in time, it's a different book that was great at that time for me. There's not one that's like transcended everything. There are probably authors that are, I'd more answer it in terms of authors that I really like and that have impacted me. Earlier in my career, Jim Collins, Good to Great. I saw that's on your shelf over here.
Yep.
I just find that I use the distinctions that he uses in that book to this day. And some of them are just really solid. They transcend time. Some people say, well, but the companies that he wrote about way back when in that book, are now failing or now not doing well. It's like, yeah, but that's because they're not doing the things anymore that they talked about in the book.
They need to reread that book.
They need to reread the book. And so Jim Collins, is great. But you've got great stuff I've read on your shelves. Lencioni, I like Lencioni a lot. Simon Sinek's wrote a couple good things that I think are really good. John Maxwell, you can't go wrong with ever. What I like about John Maxwell, he's a Christian.
Yep.
And so he'll write like that famous book, which is a great book, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, I think is what it's called. But he also has the 21 Laws of the Bible. Leadership Laws of the Bible, I think it's called. And he leans into leaders in the Bible and builds these 21 leadership laws. So it's and it's timeless. It's all timeless. And you can get into some timeless things like Covey, right? The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Sure.
It's great stuff. But there's no specific book, I don't think.
I mean, the list that you provide is definitely a good start. It's funny because that's kind of where I started as well when I started picking up more business-focused books because I was ready to actually build a business and not just some sort of sole proprietorship. So my last question for you is, I'm all about productivity. I have my routines. I call them life hacks. And what I mean by that is just, what can you do, almost like as a computer, you're hacking your computer. What can you do for yourself, or what do you do with yourself on a daily basis that kind of keeps you focused and productive?
I start my day by reading the Bible. I go back to what Brenda showed me years and years and years ago when she was doing that every morning, how she said, I feel so much less busy than when I wasn't reading the Bible. I felt harried all the time. I felt busy all the time. Didn't have enough time for anything. And then I actually took 1 hour out of my time and read the Bible, and I was focused on what was important. It gave me clarity, and I became much more productive. So I think that is a big one. Am I perfect at it? No, but I keep working to improve, but I'm fairly consistent with it. The other thoughts I have are, so we have these to-do lists, right? We got to get stuff done.
Yes.
Right. And I used to be like I had to get things crossed off, right? So what ends up happening is you do the easy stuff first. And the more complicated stuff you end up, up till midnight doing because you didn't have time, and it takes a while. And that's not a good approach. But when I have a to-do list of a bunch of stuff I got to get done, usually on that list, there's who knows what percent, but say half of the things on the list are things that you need something from someone else, right? You need some information, or you need a question answered or something like that. So a lot of people, they just work sequentially. So they kind of hit the first thing on the list and the next thing on the list and the next thing. What I do is I go down the list and I get the ball rolling on all the things that I can't control. And so it's like I'll send the email out asking the question of somebody, or I'll inquire about some information that I need to obtain, from somebody else or whatever it might be. The things that I depend on somebody to get back to me on, I'll get that ball rolling, and then I'll focus on the things I can control myself. And then the things start coming back in, right? So I'll get through something that I need to accomplish, and then I'll take an hour after lunch or whatever, and I'll start addressing the things that came back in that I had sent out earlier. And next thing you know, I'm going boom, 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 crossing 5 things off.
Wow.
That feels good.
That's an interesting. Yes, it does. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting approach, because I think I'm definitely in the boat of just doing the easy things. I think for me, it's just what emotional state I'm in. If I'm feeling motivated, then the first things I do is tackle the hardest things. But I think you hit it on the head of get the things done that are requiring others to partake in first.
Because you have to wait for it.
Correct.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's
so get the ball rolling, and then while you're waiting, then you get to work
then
on
you
the
get
other
that
things.
momentum.
And you work on the other things.
Right. Because we have to respond to them.
But then what happens is all of a sudden answers come back and you're starting crossing things off. And then you get that adrenaline. You're like, man, I'm productive. I'm getting stuff done. Right. And it pushes you forward, on the next things you're working on.
I love that. Well, I'm so grateful for you to spend time here today on this episode. And most importantly for our relationship, we've known each other for a while now. Mm-hmm. Your kids took class here at Coma and actually still talking with them today. We actually did some golfing and and I just am so grateful for our relationship and friendship.
Well, I wanted to thank you. I'm humbled that you'd ask me to do this.
Oh.
I don't put myself in the same category as some of the other people that you're talking to. So I'm humbled that you would even consider that I could bring some value to this podcast. So thanks 100%. For that. But also thank you for your friendship. But in some ways, I mean, you don't even know this, but you mentor me. The passion you have and the approach you take to being a Christian and growing as a Christian in your faith, I'm learning so much from that, and so I appreciate that probably more than you realize. And I also appreciate what you did for my kids when they were younger and going through your programs and some of the foundations that you set for them, in their discipline and their behaviors and how they look at the world and all that. So Brenda and I talk about that a lot, actually.
Well, you left me speechless.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
That's not hard to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.